Okay, welcome to another episode of Condo Insider. My name is Jane Sugimura, and this is a show about living in condos, living and working in condos. And I hope that, we are able to provide you with some information that is helpful to, your connection with condominiums. And today's episode is we're talking about mandatory or voluntary board education and training. And this is a subject matter of a bill that's pending in the legislature right now. It's Senate Bill 729. And it was introduced by my very good friend, Senator Sharon Moriwaki, who was going to be my guest today. But, she had a last minute call to participate in a hearing. So she had to bow out, but I told her I wanted to go forward with it anyway, because, this is a very pressing issue. I wanted to get the information out to the public so that if they wanted to chime in, they could do so by calling their legislators or going online and, submitting testimony. And I'm not sure if, any of the listeners out there, have any feeling or interest as to whether or not board members should be educated. Typically, when you serve on a board, and this has been brought out at the hearings, there are no requirements that you have special training or education. I mean, it's just kind of implied that because you're selected to be on a board of directors, that you are interested in the entity and that you're also interested in promoting whatever that entity does, and that you're going to be acting in the best interest of whatever that entity is, whether it's a corporation or if it's a corporation, a profit corporation or a nonprofit corporation, like the Girl Scouts or an association, which is what we're talking about today. And so some people think that it's strange that the legislature is considering a law that would require people who are elected to serve as board members of their condominium associations to have a certain type of training and to get a certificate to basically prove that they've, taken the training. Because over the years, there have been different groups, Community Associations Institute, Hawaii Council of Association of Apartment Owners, the State of Hawaii, DCCA Real Estate Branch, and all the various property management companies in town. They all offer classes to board members and to owners. And the state of Hawaii does something called Condo-Rama. It's free, and anybody can go to these seminars. Some of them are online now because of the pandemic. And what they do is they have speakers who will talk about different topics. But basically, it's to provide owners and board members with information. And some of you out there might be thinking, well, why do we, why is that necessary? And, and some owners, in fact, many owners have showed up at the legislature and complained that, their board members don't have a clue, and that, they hire their relatives to do work for the association, which is a conflict of interest. And that, and they make decisions on projects like putting PV in the association or installing fire sprinklers, and they're not, and the owners are concerned because it looks like maybe, the board has not hired experts to advise them on, what kind of contractor should they use, and whether or not the process that they're going to use is prudent and the best procedure possible for the association. You get a lot of owners who are complaining, who say that basically, the board members are out there, making stupid decisions, wasting the owner's money. And so, so there are two sides to every story. So let me just talk to you about Bill 79, because to give you an example, what happened, let me see, a couple of weeks ago, there was something that was in the news, One Archer Lane. Okay, and there were some owners who were very, very upset about a decision that their board took. And according to the board members, I mean, they were blindsided because the board essentially did a special assessment that would have resulted in them having to pay $8,000 out of their pocket, $8,000 to $10,000 to pay for repairs to their building. And, building structural repairs are not cheap. I mean, and in this case, we're talking about spalling repairs. And anybody knows who lives in Hawaii, or anybody anywhere knows that concrete buildings are porous. That means that we live by an ocean. And so when the air, we're surrounded by salt, air from the ocean that has salt water in it. And so as that goes into the building, it rusts the rebars get all rusty, and then the concrete starts falling off. And this is very dangerous, because that means your building's basically falling apart. And those of you who remember, who have been following the news, last year, a building collapsed in Florida. I think it was a 12-story building, and it collapsed because of spalling. Spalling means that, they weren't, the concrete was crumbling off of the building. The rebars are rusting. And what happens is, because the structure is getting weak, the building just collapsed on itself. And some people were killed. And, this is a very serious problem. I think it was a wake-up call for everybody in the country to, start looking at their, high-rise buildings, and to start paying attention to making repairs. And in Florida, their laws are different in Hawaii from Hawaii. In Hawaii, we've had something called a budget and reserves law. We've had it since the early 1990s, and we have it because Mazie Hirono, who is now a senator in Washington for the state of Hawaii, back in the day, she was head of consumer protection in the state house of the Hawaii state legislature. And she made sure that we had a reserve law. And what a reserve law does, and just to give you an example, she used to grumble at me. She says that she represented the Mo'iliili Makiki area. And she said that, she would get calls from her constituents grumbling about the fact that they bought into a condo a year ago, and now they're getting specially assessed $10,000 to put a new roof on the building. It's like, how come they're getting special assessed? They've only been in the building a year. How come the people weren't saving up for this new roof that they knew they would have to replace at some time? And instead of, having nothing in the bank, so that when it comes time to replace the roof, they have to assess everybody in the building, their pro rata share. And so this happened. And back in the day, before Mazie passed the law, it was voluntary. Some buildings, that had, pretty good business people on their board made sure that there was a reserve account. In other words, when they calculated the maintenance fee, they added in some portion to pay for what they call deferred maintenance. These are repairs that don't happen every year. You don't replace your roof every year. You don't paint your building every year, right? But when you have to do it, it takes a lot of money. And so if you don't have that money in the bank, to paint a building, I know to paint my 23-story condominium, it runs almost $1 million. And that's because before you paint the building, you got to make sure that all the cracks are fixed. And so, you put scaffolding around the building, and you go and you check all the floors. and you make sure that all the cracks are fixed, and then you can paint the building. And so painting a high rise is now over $1 million, and and putting a roof on is several $100,000. And this is not money that you can sock away in a year. It means that you have to put away money a little bit every month, so that every 15 years when you have to replace that roof, or every 10 years when you have to paint your building, the money is in the bank and you don't have to do special assessments. And that takes planning. And what happens, and there are tools that the condominiums have. It's called a reserve study. And so Maisie's law bill back in the 90s required all buildings to do a reserve study. And what a reserve study does is a person who has special training will come into your building and look at all your what they call component parts. In other words, they look at everything in your building that has to be repaired or fixed, that where the repairs do not happen every year. So that means looking at all your equipment, your air conditioning equipment, all of the pieces of that air conditioning equipment. And then you look at spalling, and the spalling would include the main building. If you have a garage, if you have 2 towers, I mean, it means that, you have to look at each one as a component. And then you have the elevators. Your elevators, aren't repaired or renovated every year. But when you have to do it, it's over $1 million. So you have to save because the elevators don't last forever. Okay, so you have to sock away money to do that. Your fire alarm system is also something that is in the building, and some of that goes obsolete. And so in order to keep up with technology, that means that you're going to have to replace the parts and maybe the whole system at some point. And right now, those systems are running over $1 million. And now we've got the fires. And if you live in Honolulu, you have to live with the fire safety ordinance that says any building that's over 10 stories and doesn't have open exterior corridors, you have to put in a fire sprinkler system. And we know from the Marco Polo that their retrofit ran about $5.4 million for about 600 units. And so you do the math. It's not cheap. And buildings are struggling to raise that kind of money. And you may think, well, what if we don't do it? Guess what? Your insurance goes up, because now, you're a building that doesn't have a sprinkler system, where there's a law that says you have to have it. And of course, now the insurance company says, no, now you're more risky. And so we're going to have to charge you more insurance. And so you can't win for losing. And, it's very hard, for a board to deal with a lot of these issues. And what was very clear with the One Archer Lane situation is that the owners felt blindsided. But, this education is a two-way street. It's not only the board members that probably need to be educated on what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to ask for help from consultants, but I think the owners also have to be educated. And I know Senator Moriwaki introduced a resolution that calls for the Real Estate Commission to develop a curriculum for owners and boards, and to use the real estate fund to prepare maybe educational videos that people can go online and look at, and to learn what they're supposed to do. But what the One Archer Lane situation, if you saw the news reports, you have owners who said, hey, I didn't know, and here I am, I got to come up with $8,000, and this isn't fair. But then by the same token, they live in a building that's getting older every day, and it's going to cost money to fix this. And these repairs are not cheap. And they live in a state where spalling occurs in all concrete buildings. So they have to understand that these repairs have to be done. They have to pay for it. And I read in the article where one owner said, well, when I bought into this building, my maintenance fees were $500. Excuse me, the maintenance fees are not going to stay $500 every year. I mean, that's ridiculous, because the cost of living goes up. The HECO's electricity rates from 2022 to 2023 went up over 40%. And those of you who live in condos with no fire sprinkler systems, your insurance rates went up. I know in my building, it went up $65,000 just in 2023, mainly because we don't have a fire sprinkler system. And, so this is what all high-rise buildings are going through. And so, the fact that, these owners have to pay for it should not come as a surprise. Owners have to understand that it takes money to keep their buildings well-maintained and safe. And they, as owners, are the ones who are going to have to pay for it. And as I understand what happened at 1 Archer Lane is that the board hired consultants who did an inspection and basically said that, you have spall. You have spalling repairs. Spalling repairs are not cheap. And if you don't fix it, guess what? Your building collapses like it did in Florida. And if you're an owner in that building and you were told that, if you don't come up with this $8,000, your building's going to collapse, I think that, you would probably want to pay it. And, those owners should have been going to the board meetings because the consultants did come to the board meetings, did give explanations, allowed for question and answering. And if you didn't go, and yes, if you got that letter in the mail that said, based on all of our research and all the hundreds of hours that we spent talking to consultants and going over drawings and spreadsheets, and now we, figured out we have to do this, we're going to be doing a special assessment because we don't have the money in the bank. And, and owners have to understand that these are decisions that board members have to make. They don't do it because they're trying to be mean. They're doing it because they're required by the law to maintain and repair the building, to keep the building safe. And if it means doing a special assessment, so be it. I mean, that doesn't mean that the directors are bad or evil. It means they're doing their job and they have to make a hard decision. So owners have got to cool it and back off and learn to take responsibility. And if they and rather than being caught off guard, they should start attending their board meetings and start asking questions so that they aren't caught off guard, so to speak. But anyway, this Bill 79 that Senator Sharon Moriwaki introduced seeks two things. It requires board members to get to certify, which means that they have to write. They have to write on a piece of paper saying, I have reviewed and read the condominium documents, which is the declaration, bylaws, and house rules, and they have to be certified that they have taken education or training courses that are required by this law. And the law basically tells the real estate commission, we want you to go and talk to the stakeholders, the people in the community, and come up with curriculum as to what the board members should be getting training or education on, so that they can make good decisions for their owners. And attending these, so those are the two things that the bill requires. And during the hearings that have been held since February in the legislature, some of the comments are, some of the pros, arguments for pro is that if you require board members to be educated and certified and that they've taken the courses and read their governing documents, that they're going to make better decisions. There's something called the business judgment rule, which some people who serve on boards don't even know about, but it's required. It's in the statute. And so, at least if they went through the training, they would know what the business judgment rule is. And they use that to make their decisions. And they might learn about conflicts of interest, because you hear these awful, nightmare, stories about board members who hire their relatives to do work for the association. That's a clear conflict of interest. Okay. And that's a big no-no. And so hopefully with the training that these people will learn, you don't hire your friends or relatives to work for the association where you sit on the board. That's a terrible conflict of interest. And also there's, people complain that, there's selective enforcement of the rules. In other words, if you're a friend of the board president, then you can have, they will bend the rules so that it doesn't apply to you. But if there's somebody else who they don't know as well, they're going to enforce the rules to the hill. That's called selective enforcement, and that's not permitted. And that's one of the complaints that we hear from disgruntled owners, so to speak, that the boards selectively enforce their rules. So they enforce them against some people and not against others. That's not right, and it should not be permitted. And if a board member went through training, he or she would learn that that's something that you don't do. And the argument has been made that if you make the board go through training, they will learn the rules of governance. They will become more familiar with the condo laws and policies that are in place. And this will minimize the disputes between owners, because if owners have an argument or a dispute, they sometimes bring it to the board and try to get the board involved. Or if you have a dispute between the owners and the board, okay? So, so if you have a board that is educated in policy and in governance, they might, that might reduce the disputes, these disputes, because you have a board who's more knowledgeable. And some of the cons, some of the arguments against doing the education is, number one, is that if you make board members go through this educational process and certification, that they're going to say, hey, I'm a volunteer. I got a life, and I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to go to classes, and I'm not going to sign a certification because I could get sued. I don't want to be held personally liable. And so, so it's going to discourage people from serving on the board. And there is a concern that if, you sign these, if you sign a certification that says I reviewed the governing documents and it's in writing, and somehow down the road there's a claim violation, and they're going to say, well, didn't you read the declaration? Here's your piece of paper, your certification. You said you read it, so how come you voted the way you did? And so you have board members who are concerned that by enforcing this, by passing this bill, that they would be exposed to liability. And also, there are some people, some opponents of the bill that say, the language is, very vague. When you say review, what do you mean? What does review mean? And so, if you don't define what review means, because review could mean anything. And so does that mean here is a declaration, I looked at it? Or does review mean I looked at every single line, every single word of this 68-page document? Or maybe it's a 138-page document. So are you saying that I'm going to be liable and I'm going to have to remember everything in that document? And if I don't, you're going to sue me? And so, so these are the kinds of things that, were raised. The upshot, and we're waiting for a revised bill. The bill came on for hearing last week, and it was amended. And the verbal ruling of the committee chair was that it was going to be looked at by the auditor for a sunrise review. And that's something that the legislature does when they decide, okay, we're going to install this new regulation, and they have the auditor come in and check it out to make sure that there's a good reason for legislating this policy to require this new regulation. And the regulation is requiring board members to be educated. So anyway, that's what they said verbally, but we haven't seen the language of the amendment. So we're not quite sure, but if that's the case, that means that there's not going to be a decision this year on any type of mandatory education, but I think that the legislation is going to encourage the real estate commission to talk to stakeholders and try to come up with a curriculum. And while I'm talking about this, for the viewers who are listening to me, I encourage owners and board members to visit the DCCA website. They have a website, and it's full of articles and these 3-minute. There it is, the 3-minute videos, and anything that you would want to know about condominiums or declarations, the bylaws, how to do arbitration, how to do mediation. And in Hawaii, if you do mediation of condo disputes, there's something called evaluative mediation, and it's subsidized by the state of Hawaii. The state of Hawaii will pay for the neutral mediator. And so you go to that website and it will tell you exactly how that's done. And like I said, there's 3-minute videos. The 3-minute videos are very entertaining, and they're short, and it will, they have professional actors who kind of do the role playing, and they talk about enforcement, they talk about mediation, they talk about what's it like to be a board member, and but anyway, the 3-minute videos are very entertaining. Oh, budget and financing, and condominium rules, and association regulations, and how they are developed and how they're enforced. And so so I really, really urge everybody to go and check out those pages. The website, because the website has such good information on it. And we really need to educate both owners and board members on the complexities of living in it's hard living in a condominium because of the issues that come up. And if it's an older building, it makes it even harder because the repairs and maintenance are more expensive for an older building than they are for a newer building. But this issue about education of board members is alive and well in the legislature. The fact that it's going through a sunrise review just means that it's going to be one more step before the legislature gets involved. And my advice to board members is to take advantage of the DCCA website, take advantage of the courses that are currently being offered by CAI, Hawaii Council, the DCCA real estate branch, and the various property management companies in town who have these board training sessions, to take advantage of them. Because, at some point, if the state of Hawaii makes it mandatory, I think it's going to make your life a little bit harder, a little bit more complicated. And if you were to do this voluntarily, it might stop the complaints from the disgruntled owners who show up at the legislature, and they grumble, and they don't paint a pretty picture of boards of directors. In fact, the boards of directors come off as being petty and self-serving, and power hungry, all these negative terms, and which they're not. Most board members, they try very, very hard to make good decisions that are going to benefit their association. And so I think it's a bad rap. They're getting a bad rap. And there are a few people out there who I agree. I've actually seen instances of bad board members. And yes, they're out there. And I wish we could get them to come in and sit down and go through some training, because they make life uncomfortable for people who live in their projects, which isn't fair to those residents. And so I'm very sympathetic when I hear people talk about some boards who won't let them speak at board meetings, who do selective enforcement of rules and make it very obvious, who have conflict of interest by hiring their friends and relatives to do work for the association. They do it blatantly. I mean, these are not acts that are condoned by the Real Estate Commission or by the statute, or I don't think by the governing documents of any condominium. And so I think owners have to understand that there are just like anything else, there are bad apples everywhere. And unfortunately, we had some bad apples who sit on boards of directors of condominiums. And what this law is trying to do is address that situation. And but we don't know now when or how soon that will happen. And so we'll just have to wait and see. So we will be reporting at the end of the session anyway as to what happens with this. And Senator Moriwaki did say that she would be on one of our shows after the session, and I'm sure this is one bill that she's going to be talking about, because this is one that she has worked very hard to at least get a hearing. And thank you very much for joining us for this episode. And please tune in next week for another episode of Condo Insider. Mahalo and aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.